Why is it so hard to define creativity? Are you creative?
Everyone is creative. Everyone is creating.
What I'm interested in, though, is it true?
You know, a lot of people really struggle to give themselves permission to be creative.
Like, what does that even mean?
What is creativity?
A lot of creativity is restricted to arts and crafts, even though creativity shows up everywhere in real life.
Google it. You will find multiple definitions.
A lot of people conflate creativity with the arts.
Here's the thing I kind of find funny. People broadly recognize that creativity is a good thing, a very valuable, desirable thing. You have whole sections in bookstores about being creative. You have a bunch of podcasts designed to stoke your creativity. I've gone to a number of different conferences just talking about being creative. And I see so many job postings where a desired skill in the qualifications is creativity. I see if I say something like we need an education system that enhances people's creativity rather than inhibiting it, I just get a bunch of head nods and people agree. But then if I ask, what do you really mean by that? Define creativity. I get a lot more hesitation. I mean, let me ask you, if I asked you to define creativity, what would you say? So we're not the first to be perplexed by creativity. The way people have thought of novel ideas or innovations has really evolved alongside the cultures people find themselves in. In a lot of ancient cultures, people didn't really think of creativity as an individual attribute. Novel ideas were more so considered discoveries, and things we think of as art were thought of more as imitations of nature. In medieval Christian Europe, creative ideas were still seen as something that came from beyond the individual. Good ideas were divinely inspired, so if you were a person who had a lot of them, then it just seemed like God was blessing you all the time with these good ideas. It wasn't until the Enlightenment came around where the concept of creativity started to shift a little more individualistically. Intelligence and imagination became traits that were more frequently praised, and these perhaps led to the more modern understanding we have now of creativity. It wasn't all the way until the 1920s where we had a more articulated framework for what creativity was. In his book, The Art of Thought, Graham Wallas broke down creativity into different parts. Preparation, focusing on a problem in order to solve it, then incubation, just sitting with it, letting it soak in. Intimation was getting a feeling that a solution was on its way, and illumination was the point where the creative idea shows up and you become aware of it. The last part was verification, where you apply the idea and see if it really works. This is not a bad framework, especially for the first time somebody's taken a shot at it as far as we know. It still makes it seem like creative ideas just kind of come to you out of nowhere and there's no explaining why. But at least this process, the way it's described, feels relatable. At the end of the century, two researchers built off this concept while trying to portray the relationship between creativity and intelligence. Sternberg and O'Hara said that creativity was a type of intelligence, or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe intelligence was a type of creativity. Or maybe they're just overlapping constructs and they both have some traits in common. Maybe all of them. Or maybe none. They were kind of open to all of these interpretations of the relationship. I appreciate that some people have attempted to define creativity. I also appreciate that it's this really mysterious thing and kind of escapes definition. But I think some of the fun of it is being able to look at things and say, hey, well, what about this? But there's something that seems off about how often we're telling people to nurture their creativity, to practice creativity, without giving anything close to a definition for creativity, right? It would be like we're telling everyone to be more like Kevin. And then we're not really telling them who Kevin is, we're not telling them which Kevin we're talking about, or what traits of Kevin to emulate. It's just Kevin, you figure it out. I appreciate that in spite of the futility, some people have been willing to try and give us a definition of creativity that's somewhat useful.
Not being satisfied with the status quo.
I think of creativity in a very broad sense.
What if creativity has no definition at all?
Creativity is having the propensity to create, having the desire to create.
Now, even though defining creativity is a nearly impossible task to do in a way that leaves everybody satisfied, I think that when you ask yourself what creativity actually means to you, it can be really helpful. So I'm gonna do just that. I've actually come across a few core beliefs about creativity that translate directly into action and the way I approach my creative work. So my first key idea around creativity is this. Creativity starts with curiosity. I think we often think of creativity as having something to say and a unique way of expressing that, and I think a lot of that concept comes from just how individualistic our society is compared to past societies. That leads to us thinking of creativity as basically a personality trait. And we end up just hailing the praises of individuals we consider really creative, be it Jordan Peele or Kendrick Lamar or Judy Blume. And hey, those people really are creative, so good for them. But when we think of creativity just as this personality trait, as something that some people are innately born with, it doesn't give us a lot to do, except maybe be jealous of the ones who have it and self-conscious of our own creativity. My own creative work practically revolves around the theme of curiosity. I mean, the stuff I have the most fun making is stuff where I get to explore things I've just wondered about for a really long time. So the first thing that got me interested in moss was wondering about its capacity to capture carbon. Turns out it has some pretty cool features when it comes to that. I think for things like what I often work on, explainer videos, that makes a lot of sense. It's easy to see how curiosity is the starting point for that. I make an observation, I say, hey, I see a bunch of Thai restaurants all over town and not a lot of Thai people, and I start investigating the answers and come up with a video like this. We've got good Thai food everywhere, but where are the Thai people? The through line between curiosity and creativity seems pretty obvious when you put it that way. But I think curiosity goes a lot further than just trying to unpack a cultural or scientific phenomenon. You can be curious about other people, or your own experiences, or why you feel the way you feel after a certain thing. So much great art has been made just by people going through something, expecting to feel one way about it, and realizing they're actually having a very different experience than the one they anticipated, and then asking, why? You can be curious about a bit of tension you experience around a belief that matters to you, or a piece of cognitive dissonance. Sometimes I look at the cultural conversations happening around us and I wonder, are we actually making progress towards a more just world, or are we just going in circles? What do we make of the pushback? Does that outweigh the progress? Or has it always been like this? How do I reconcile the side of me that's super idealistic about things and wants to be uncompromising about my values with the other side of me that's kind of a strategic pragmatist and realizes that strategy is necessary to make change? All these big questions are also part of the curiosity that guides my work. When I look at what someone like Kendrick Lamar does in his music, I see some common themes that are always popping back up. How much is a person a product of their environment? How much do they have the ability to transcend the expectations set for them based on that? How much of that difference comes from a person's determination versus sheer luck? So many of the songs, especially the ones that tell a whole story, revolve around that tension. To get in touch with your creativity, I think it takes being comfortable not knowing things. I love the podcast Radio Lab. I love the way they explore scientific phenomenon by peeling back one layer after another until they're at a point where the only logical conclusion is, whoa. Creativity respects the mysteries that there are in life, but it's not afraid of them. It plays with those mysteries. It approaches them with honesty. Okay, so what next? You're curious about something, you start wondering about something you're experiencing, and you start exploring it. Then what? There's gotta be more to creativity than this, right? As you start exploring these different things, it takes you from one discovery to the next, and these are much more like stepping stones than they are final destinations. But they're meaningful discoveries, and you know you've got to spend some time with them. See, creativity is all about the connections you make. Let me explain the two different ways I mean that. First of all, when you start exploring your questions, your meaningful mysteries, and you start to make observations, you might start picking up on recurring patterns or themes that show up again and again and again. One of the things I'm really thankful for is having the tendency to see connections between things that are just so seemingly unrelated. Hamilton gets a lot of attention for putting things together that seem to have no connection, like founding fathers and hip-hop or American history and Broadway. But one of the reasons why it works so well is Lin-Manuel Miranda saw these connections between things like the way one particular founding father lived his life with urgency and the way modern immigrants have to hustle. He saw that and he took that to its fullest conclusion. Going back to my Kendrick Lamar example, you can hear him often talk about the relationship people have with the environments they grow up in. You listen to his lyrics and you think, okay, that really seems like he's talking about Compton, where he grew up, and what it was like at the time. But then you can look at it another way and see how it fits into questions about the US more broadly, politically, culturally. There's a connection. Jordan Peele, he noticed all these connections between how black bodies are commodified in the US and the way bodies are exploited in the genre of horror movies, and he started playing with that connection. He was able to present these ideas to us one way in Get Out and a totally different way in Us when he circled back to it, and that's because creative work is an exploration of your curiosity. It's not just this one and done type deal. When you start to notice these connections and things you're curious about or things you experience, you start working out how they fit together, and you process this, whether that's in writing or art or in action or policies or whatever medium you happen to work with. And this becomes a whole living process. There's of course one other important connection to be made, and it's the connection between this process you're going through and the people you're making it for. You know, how are you inviting people into this? For Hamilton, it was that relatability to the immigrant story for a lot of his audience. So far I've explored how creativity starts with curiosity and makes connections, but of course creativity is so much more than just navel-gazing. You actually have to do something with it. You have to engage that curiosity and those connections. You have to do the work. Being creative is largely about showing up again and again to do the work. By doing the work, I mean you've got to process that curiosity, those connections. You've got to follow them to the next set of questions that they invite, and to keep going with that. Keep doing that for as long as it takes to land at that point of whoa. And you can do this through written words, through visuals, through conversations, whatever it is you consider your art. But creativity takes work. There's no way around it. It leads through work. People talk about creativity inconsistently. Sometimes we talk about it like it's this thing that we're just born with, that it's deep within us. Other times we talk about it as something we've got to cultivate and to build up, like a muscle. Like we can get more creative over time if we just put in the work. Honestly, I think it's a bit of both. I tend to agree with those who say everyone is creative, or probably more accurately, I'd agree that everyone can be creative, which I guess that would mean creativity is at least somewhat innate. Now, the reason I think this is because of the way kids play. Creativity just seems like our natural state, and it's just something we grow out of over time. But it does take work to keep our creativity alive, and I think that work keeps us from getting dull as we age. The vast majority of this work just means showing up over and over to engage your questions, to engage your creativity. I'm a big fan of taking on challenges to consistently make something, whether that's on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. I kind of resonate with folks who think that ideas within you are kind of like items on a conveyor belt. And in order to get to the good ones sooner, the only way to do that is to get through the bad ones faster. When I started this channel, I had the vision to help people engage their curiosity and to more deeply appreciate the world around us by blending personal vlogs with explainer videos and, of course, capturing a lot of the travels that I was on while I was at it. I challenged myself to make 2 videos a month and to keep showing up for that, but just when I started this whole thing was about the time the world shut down. While travel was out of reach, having that commitment to still make 2 videos a month allowed me to dig deeper and to find some topics worth exploring that I might not have if things were easier. So, you do your work. You give yourself permission to wonder, you give yourself the space to explore your curiosity. That takes you to new places, and you're able to draw on one connection after the other. You're seeing these patterns, you're seeing parallels, and you're working through them with a pen, with a camera, with whatever your tool set is. That's creativity in a nutshell, right? Kind of. But there's just one other thing, and it's kind of an important idea that's a big part of my framework for creativity. Creativity is more about the process than the product. Our world places a premium on products, on finished products, at the expense of the creative process. There's this gag among writers where being a writer means you enjoy having written, not so much that you enjoy writing something. And like, no. Okay, I mean, I get it. I've been there. I know how it feels when you just sit down and try and force yourself to be inspired, and that can feel really painful. But I think that's what happens when we're just so focused on having finished products out rather than engaging the process, than giving ourselves the chance to enjoy it. And that's increasingly antithetical to how I think of creativity. You just sometimes gotta sit down and play. Okay, yeah, I know that's easier said than done, especially when you have deadlines and drafts due and all that. But I know the emphasis on product over process is one that's been shaped by applying a pretty consumeristic mentality to creativity. I mean, it's the finished product that sells. That's pretty much what people pay for. And that's why so many people care less about what their process looks like, care less about actually enjoying it and engaging it, as long as they can get to that finished product. When you go into a restaurant, you're paying for the food that you get on your plate. We're so distanced from the process that the cooking happens in another room and the food comes from another facility. Most likely it was grown in another country. When we think of creativity for the final product more so than the process, we start caring more about things like vanity statistics, like view counts, book sales, and arbitrary awards, rather than the actual heart of the creative work. And the ironic thing is that good products are made when good processes are regular. And when I reframe creativity to be more about the process, that's when curiosity becomes a greater ally. That's when I can notice these meaningful connections more easily, and more importantly, it's the thing that allows me to show up again and again and again. So here we go, one more time. Here's the creative framework. Creativity starts with curiosity. Creativity makes connections. Creativity takes showing up. And creativity is about the process. Now, what's the point of all this? Isn't there enough pontificating about creativity out there already? Yeah, there is. If you stop things right there, this is just a list of ideas, and we already have plenty of those. But when you apply these things, you can actually start to build practices, routines, and approaches that help build a more creative life. By seeing curiosity as the start of creativity, I worry a lot less about having to generate these original ideas out of nowhere. Instead, I simply try to give myself more space to wonder in my everyday life. And when a big question presents itself, which it does, I get excited looking for the possible answers. By realizing that finding connections between seemingly disconnected things is part of creativity, I found new ways to apply that curiosity to different things I learn about and discover. It's helpful given that my interests tend to be all over the place. By recognizing that creativity is really about showing up, I've gotten more and more disciplined about doing my creative work regularly. You might know this, back in 2010, I started the challenge of taking a photo every day, and I actually haven't stopped since. I now frame a lot of my creative work around this method of just showing up time and time again. There was the challenge last year of making 2 videos a month. Not all of them were gems, not all of them were home runs, but I don't think I would have gotten to my better ideas without the determination to just stay on track with the commitment. Finally, by recognizing that it's not about the product necessarily, but the process, I'm able to do all of this with a sense of ease instead of the self-applied pressure to treat myself like a factory. For the most part, it's kept my creative work fun and fresh, and I've enjoyed the time I spend working on stuff. Okay, if you couldn't tell from this video, creativity is one of my favorite topics. The framework I shared here is just one that's helped me out, and at the same time, it's one that I hold loosely, knowing that the topic of creativity is so vast and there's so many ways to look at it, and it's kind of mysterious, and I like it that way. Do you have any guiding ideas on creativity that have helped you out in your practice? Let me know. Share with me in the comments, and like and subscribe, and stay curious, my friends.